Hello everyone, welcome to the Fly Racing K&M GNCC post-race show. I'm your host Jason Hooper, coming to you from the beautiful, the scenic, the lovely Snowshoe Mountain Resort here in Snowshoe, West Virginia for round 8 of the championship series. This is obviously one of the coolest places that we come to the GNCC series. You know, we've got the whole village up at the top of the mountain with Starbucks and the restaurants and the bars and, you know, hotel rooms. And, you know, the other unique feature that we have here is the start on the road, split up into, you know, rows of 5 riders. So, you know, a lot of different things there. We run 2 loops, one on each side of the mountain, making one big, about 16 or 17 mile loop today. A little bit shorter than in the past, but still equally as gnarly as it's ever been. So, looked to be a pretty good day. You know, on the first row we had top 5 in points. So we had Paul Whibley, Caleb Russell. One rider missing there, that was Charlie Mullins, who was out with a dislocated elbow and had a fracture there in his radial head from a crash at a Loretta Lynn's regional qualifier a few weeks ago. So if you weren't sure about that, Charlie definitely didn't race, and he's questionable for the John Penton. But anyway, so that left Rory Mead and Stuart Baylor on that first row, and we got the race off. You know, no whole shot at this one because, you know, the rows start, and, you know, the second row started 10 seconds behind him, and then, you know, we had a couple guys there that we were really going to watch out for. That was Jason Thomas and Andrew DeLong. You know, those are riders that excel in these, you know, gnarly, rocky conditions, and they were definitely going to be factors in the race as the day went on. But early on, it was Caleb Russell who jumped out to an early lead, which was, you know, kind of surprising. Caleb has always struggled at this track, and you know, wondering how long it was going to last, and, you know, we were also wondering how long until Rory takes the lead, because we've seen this year the guy is a machine when it comes to the gnarly technical stuff. And he put on a clinic at the race in Kentucky. He did, you know, jumped out to a really big lead in West Virginia at the last round, and it wasn't long for Rory had jumped out front, but Caleb was keeping him in tow, and those two guys started to really check out. And you know, I think the second time we saw him, it was already Jason Thomas and Andrew DeLong right behind Jordan Ashburn, who was also on that second row, and those guys were working their way up into the overall, and Paul Whibley had dropped way back. You know, the Axeman, he's not a guy that necessarily excels in these types of conditions and doesn't necessarily like them, but, you know, he's a guy you can always count on for a strong finish, and it was looking a little worrisome for him early on. You know, he dropped back, he was 8th bike, 9th bike at one point, and Caleb was in second. You know, obviously the championship rivals there, so it was a rough start to the day for Paul, and but his teammate Jordan Ashburn was having a great start, running third for the first few laps, and he was keeping those leaders in check, and, you know, well, he was keeping Caleb Russell in check, because eventually Rory Mead pulled out to close to a 2-minute lead at one point. It was pretty crazy. But as the race wore on, Caleb started inching in until that last lap, and you know, it ended up becoming a battle to the finish, basically. You know, with 2 miles to go, Caleb had pulled within 5 seconds of him, and we heard over the radio that he ended up tagging a tree about 2 miles from the finish, and thought that was probably going to end his hopes. But 1 mile later, he had caught back up, and he was only about 5 or 6 seconds back. They come to the finish, and Rory had just enough breathing room. I think he finished about 6 seconds ahead of him, if I look at my sheet right here and I can do the math. Yeah, 6 seconds behind. But you know, it was kind of the day that Rory Mead expected to have, what we kind of expected to have. But sometimes that's a lot of pressure. You know, we talked to Rory early in the season. He said that, you know, before the year even started, he was looking forward to this round. He was kind of revolving his season around this round. You know, we had the unknowns at some of the different races, but he knew that he could excel here, and he was really setting himself up for it. Now, this is his second win, but that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. And, you know, after having such good rides, he was the favorite to win this race, and the favorite doesn't always win. Caleb Russell was not a favorite to win this race. There's no doubt about it. I mean, maybe he thought he could win, but I'm not so sure if that would be honest if he told you that. You know, Caleb is not a rock rider. He's not a mud riding guy. He's a little guy. He struggles typically in these conditions, but, you know, we've seen the last couple years he's done well. He's ridden well, and you know, he got second at West Virginia a couple weeks ago, which was a pretty gnarly track up there at the Mountaineer Run. And then, you know, he kept Rory Mead, who is without a doubt the best rock rider that we have going on in the GNCCs right now, pretty well in check towards the end of the race. So that was an impressive ride for Caleb. Then Paul Whibley finally worked his way back up, you know, the Axeman that we're used to. Now, he was a good bit off those first 2 guys, but he got himself into third in the XC1 class and was battling with Jason Thomas for latter stages of the race, and they were going back and forth. Thomas started 10 seconds behind, so he had the adjusted time on his side, and he put in a charge. And you could see these guys when they came up to the top of the mountain, man, they were absolutely pinning it going to the finish, because every second was gonna count for those guys, and they were coming in, and Thomas ended up getting him by, it looks like, a tenth of a second going into for the overall on adjusted time, which is absolutely insane. It was 2 hours, 51 minutes, 25 seconds, and 0.87, so 87 tenths of a second. Whibley was at 92, so no, excuse me, that's 5/100ths of a second, which is borderline. That's so close to call. So, that last little bit that Thomas pushed gets him his first win of the year, first win for the new KR4 performance team that he's on, first win on that KTM 250 two-stroke. So that was a really impressive ride for him. And then, the rider we haven't really talked about was Stuart Baylor. We saw him race a couple weekends ago in Wyoming, or a weekend ago in Wyoming. Didn't go so well. He was recovering from his wrist injury, and Stu just was never in it. He I don't think he's going to admit that the wrist is bothering him, but it looked like it wasn't. It wasn't the Stuart Baylor that we had seen in the earlier rounds, and he was a pretty distant third the majority of the day behind Andrew DeLong, who kept Thomas honest for a good portion of the race. But eventually, Jason pulled out a little bit, and DeLong still ended up finishing a 5th overall, which is a pretty solid ride, second in the class. He gained some points on Baylor, but loses points to Jason Thomas, who's stretching out his lead, cutting into that lead that Baylor had established in the beginning of the season. So some other riders we got to give a shout out to. Nick Farringer finished 6th overall here today. I think Nick finished 5th overall last year. He typically doesn't excel at GNCC racing, but he obviously can ride this stuff. And then Bobby Prochnow came down from Canada and raced, the little collaboration there with the WMR KTM team and the RPM KTM team from out west. And Prochnow's a guy we typically see in Endurocross. He did really well at that Tennessee knockout. So we knew he could ride the technical stuff, but you never really know how these guys are going to last for the 3 hours. And he did all right. Some riders that ended up having some struggles. We talked about Jordan Ashburn early on, and he was in 3rd place for the first 3 laps of the race, like I said. And I talked to him after the race, and I said, "What happened?" And he said, "I don't know." And that's not really what you're looking for. It's good to hear that it wasn't a big crash that hurt him or a bike problem. He said he just kind of lost his mojo there for the last half of the race, and him and his dad were sitting there just trying to figure out what could have happened. He said he was getting passed by B riders and vet B riders going up hills, and where he was struggling, that he feels like he's a pretty good hill climb rider. And so it was a frustrating ride for Jordan, who actually looked like he switched back to the YZ450F after a few not so good rounds on the WR. So bummer for him, but still finished 6th in the class, 10th overall, which is, if your worst day is a 6th and 10th overall, it's probably not too bad. But I know Jordan's really wanting to get back up on the podium. Thad Duvall, home state race, another struggle. He had a little bit of struggles here. It seems like Thad's had a hard time matching that awesome ride he had when he got 2nd overall from the XC2 class, and I think that was 2008 or 2008. And it's he never really was in it, and he dropped off quite a bit there at the end of the race. Nate Canny, another guy who's podiumed here before, or won here before, and just Nate Dogg had some struggles too. We never really saw much of him. Or Chris Bach, another guy who's podiumed here before. Not exactly sure what happened to those guys, but they weren't really ever factors in the race. And it's kind of changing the guard, I guess. Nate used to be the guy that you could always count on to have really, really great rides in the rocks, and now that that's been passed on to Rory, who's a new guy, and apparently Caleb Russell is moving in on him as well. Got to give a big shout out to Grant Baylor, 11th overall. I mean, that's amazing. 250A class. Obviously, he won that class by quite a large margin, and 11th overall is pretty impressive. So big shout out to him. He was working in on his brother, who finished 8th overall. So a little extra rivalry there in the Baylor household. But it was a great weekend here. We had beautiful weather. Great racing. This is a track where if things go the right way for one rider, we've seen some wins by David Knight that were close to 10 minutes, and so it was cool to have a fairly close battle for the overall. 6 seconds separating 2 guys. That's pretty awesome. Didn't see an XC2 guy get the win. This is a track we saw Stuart Baylor almost do it last year. Thad's almost done it here. But the two-stroke did win for all you two-stroke fans out there. So I know we're gonna have some debates on KTM talk about that probably, but. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the scoop here on the race at Snowshoe. I'm going to cut it off. We'll see you guys in a couple weeks at the John Penton. Thanks for watching. Take care.